Welcome to another Church History class. Good to have you. Good to be privileged to study world civilizations or world history. Let us pause a prayer. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the privilege you have afforded us to do your work. I pray, Lord, that you take control now of me and of this class, of the participants and of the instruments engaged to make this class possible. In the precious name I pray, amen. Now, the study of history is a study of the past. That's it. Knowledge of the past gives us perspective on our societies today. Knowledge of the past. You want a perspective? Study the past. It shows different ways in which people have identified problems and tried to resolve them, as well as important common impulses in the human experience. History can inform through its variety, remind us of some human constants, and provide a common vocabulary and examples that aid in mutual communication. The study of history is also the study of change. Historians analyze the major changes in the human experience over time and examine the ways in which those changes connect the past to the present. They try to distinguish between superficial and fundamental change, as well as between sudden and gradual change. They explain why change occurs and what impact it has. Finally, they pinpoint continuities from the past along with innovations. History, in other words, is a study of human society in motion. And motion is not current affairs. It makes connections and it does seek to relate the past to the present. But it is not a study of the present. It is a study of the past. But the present has been built from the past. World history is not simply a collection of histories of various societies, but a subject in its own right. World history is the study of historical events in a global context. It does not attempt to sum up everything that has happened in the past. It focuses on two principal subjects: the evolution of leading societies and the interaction among different peoples around the globe. Serious attempts to deal with world history are relatively recent. And the father of history. I was going to tell you, but I wanted to research that and put it in this reflection. Give me a paragraph on the name and background, and if you can identify even one work of the father of history in your reflection, a paragraph on that. Many historians have attempted to locate the evolution of their own societies in the context of developments in a larger known world. Herodotus, though particularly interested in the origins of Greek culture, wrote also of developments around the Mediterranean. Ibn Khaldun wrote of what he knew about the developments in Africa and Europe as well as in the Muslim world, but not until the 20th century. With an increase in international contacts, a vastly expanded knowledge of the historical patterns of major societies, did a full world history become possible. In the West, world history depended on a growing realization that the world could not be understood simply as a mirror reflecting the West's greater glory or as a stage for Western dominated power politics. This hard won realization continues to meet some resistance. Nevertheless, historians in several societies have attempted to develop an international approach to this subject that includes but goes beyond merely establishing a context for the emergence of their own civilizations. I read it again. Nevertheless, historians in several societies have attempted to develop an international approach to the subject that includes but goes beyond merely establishing a context for the emergence of their own civilizations. In other words, you need to take an interest in the past. There is the present civilization. Not every country, not every society, human society, is at the same level of civilization. In terms of the achievements, modernity, um, things like that, level of education and culture. But on a global scale, the world is far above what it was and what it used to be. Far beyond that on a whole. And even those that are not as developed as some are still above um, the people of their past, their past generations. So, historians in several societies have attempted to develop an international approach to this subject that includes but goes beyond merely establishing a context. Not just establishing a context for the emergence of their own civilizations, but it goes beyond that. What are the factors that have led to it? What are the struggles? What are the pains? What are the sacrifices? What are the fruits? What are the blessings? Understanding of world history has been increasingly shaped by two processes that define historical inquiry: debate and detective work. Detective work is an art, is one of the strategies of the historian. Just like the journalist or the insurance underwriter. Historians are steadily uncovering new data, not just about particular societies, but about lesser known contacts. Looking at a variety of records and artifacts, for example, they learn how an 8th century battle between Arab and Chinese forces in Central Asia brought Chinese prisoners who knew how to make paper to the Middle East, where their talents were quickly put to work, and they argue about world history frameworks, how Central European actions should be in world history of the past 500 years, and whether a standard process of modernization is useful or distorting in measuring the developments in modern Turkey or China. Though debate comes Through debate comes advances in how world history is understood and conceptualized, just as the detective work advances the factual base. It is one of the major factors that has brought civilization spread, that has created what is called a cross fertilization of cultures, is a movement of people and travel. And in this instance, just cited, wars. Chinese were captured from China and brought to the Middle East, and thereupon, or Central Europe, and thereupon they discovered that these people were useful, or this in useful. They had the talent to put to make paper. At that time, China, they were making in the known world. Well, the contacts were being made China and Central Europe and Middle East and so on. The Chinese had the means of making their paper was superior to papers being made by people around, and their paper played a significant role in the uh, the 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 invention, not just the paper, but their knowledge too. Of using printing blocks, um, their invention of paper and putting letters and blocks to print factored significantly and revolutionized the printing. They were, in other words, Europeans had been trying to create a printing machine. Their paper wasn't good enough, and the ideas they got from China, one, their paper plus the printing blocks, boosted the effort and contributed significantly to the revolution, which impacted the what is known as the Renaissance, because printing presses started popping up all over Europe and the old world, and information started to move accordingly. So it was, in other words, development and civilization result from human interaction, whether by means of commerce, travel, carry ideas and items to sell, and ideas that they pass on, or through military conflict and prisoners of war, and so on. But it in societies, human societies have impacted other human societies, and and resulting in what is known as cross-fertilization of cultures. Most humans have always shown a tendency to operate in groups that provide a framework for economic activities, governance, and cultural forms, beliefs, and artistic styles. These groups or societies may be quite small hunting and gathering bands, often numbering no more than 60 people. World history usually focuses on somewhat larger societies with more extensive economic relationships. One vital kind of grouping is called civilization. So world history usually focuses on somewhat larger societies with more extensive economic relationships. One vital kind of grouping is called civilization. The idea of civilization as a type of human society is central to most world history, though it also generates debate, and though historians are now agreed that it is not the only kind of grouping that warrants attention. This what is considered to be civilized. Civilizations, unlike some other societies, generate surpluses beyond basic survival needs. This in turn promotes a variety of of specialized occupations and heighten the social differentiation. People begin to specialize in this and some in that and some in that, and heightened social differentiation, as well as regional and long distance trading networks. Yes, the Chinese used to travel with a caravan right through the Middle East, quite likely through Israel, sections of Israel, to Europe, because the great highway of the world passed through Israel. And of course, they traded with the other Asian countries like India, and the Africans used to trade too, and the Arabs were also trading. So they were learning and they were passing on ideas. They were acquiring new items and they were selling items that were of great need in those cultures. So it happened through long distance trading networks. Surplus production also spurs the growth of cities and the development of formal states with some bureaucracy, in contrast to more informal methods of governing. Most civilizations have also developed systems of writing. That is a basic part of civilization. Writing. And writing uh, stores information and passes on information. Very, very important. Civilizations are not necessarily better than other kinds of societies. Not necessarily. But in many respects, a civilized society is better than one that is not civilized. In many respects. Nomadic groups have often demonstrated great creativity in technology and social relationships, as well as promoting global contacts more vigorously than settled civilizations sometimes did. That is true. Because they were up and about. They would come to, say they were living on the fringe of Israeli state, and from there they would move on to Saudi Arabia. From there they would move on to France, and they were taking new ideas and artifacts and technology. They were learning new things, and they were. I know why the point is being made that societies or civilizations are not necessarily better than other societies in some respects, because the nomadic group, that society, did have something to offer what would be considered a civilized, say, a Rome, when Rome was on top. It did have something to offer. And of course, it did learn too from Rome. Right? And so, even though the Romans might have considered them uncivilized and nomadic and barbarians, they did have something to contribute. So, no, there is disagreement about exactly what defines a civilization. For example, what about cases like the Incas where there was no writing? Well, they were civilized to an extent, and that is why you don't have a lot of information coming from there, apart from when the contacts were made, Europeans made contacts with them, what they were able to learn, and some of it because they didn't speak the language. So they observed some, they misunderstood some, they misinterpreted, and they noted whatever impression they got. Use carefully, however, the idea of civilization as a form of human social organization, and an unusually extensive one, has merit. Along with agriculture, which developed earlier, civilizations have given human groups the capacity to fundamentally reshape their environments and to dominate most other living creatures. The history of civilizations embraces most of the people who have ever lived. Their literature, so this is how you assess civilization. Sometimes some concepts are difficult to be defined. Civilization is difficult to be defined, but can be described. So the history of civilizations embraces most of the people who have ever lived. Their literature, formal scientific discoveries, art, music, architecture, and inventions, their most elaborate social, political, and economic systems, their brutality and destruction caused by conflicts, their exploitation of other species, their degradation of the environment, a result of changes in technology and the organization of work. You assess these. What was this technology like, or the technology of that society? And you'd have to assess it within the context of the time. And of course, you're going to compare it now. So, within the context of the time, this society is against that one. Did they have similar technology, or was the technology in one society superior to the other? The technology in the other society, things like that. To be truly global in scope, our inquiry into the history of civilization must not be constricted by the narrow Western-centric standards of determining what is civilized. Many civilized peoples have regarded outsiders with different physical features and cultures as uncouth barbarians or even subhumans. Even more recently, in awarding a society civilized status, most European and American writers have insisted that monumental buildings, cities, writing, and a high level of technology be present before they can award civilized status to a society. In fact, different civilizations have stressed different facets of human creativity. The Chinese have consistently built large and effective political systems, but Chinese thinkers have formulated only one major religion, Taoism. Taoism, and it has had only a limited appeal within and beyond East Asia. Taoism. That means it is not considering Confucianism as a religion, more like a philosophy that guides them, and no doubt would impact Taoism, and Taoism would impact it too. By contrast, the peoples of India have produced some humankind's most sophisticated and sublime religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, but they have rarely known periods of political unity and strong government. The civilizations of the Maya made remarkable discoveries in astronomy and mathematics, but their technology remained roughly equivalent to that of Stone Age peoples as late as the arrival of the Spaniards in the 16th century. These examples suggest that rather than stressing particular attainments such as the capacity to build pyramids or wheeled vehicles, a genuinely global definition of what it means to be civilized should focus on underlying patterns of social development that are common to complex societies throughout history. The attributes that determine whether a particular society is civilized or not should be freed from ethnocentrism, the tendency to judge other people's cultural forms solely on the basis of how much they resemble one's own. So you don't use your thing to judge others. Their practices might not resemble your practices. Much of world history can be organized through careful comparisons of the leading characteristics of the major civilizations, such as formal governments, family structures, and art. Remembering what civilizations have in common helps us to manage the complexity of world history and to highlight the key distinctions that also exist among major societies. Comparison gives us a means of connecting historical developments within different civilizations and allows us to identify key patterns that ought to be remembered and explained. It also helps capture the process of historical change. A situation new to one society can be compared with similar situations elsewhere, Many key changes, furthermore, develop independently within a civilization, and here emphasized and here analyzed at the civilization level is inescapable. Mhm. World history is not, however, simply a progression of separate civilizations that can be compared in various ways. An understanding of the kinds of contacts different civilizations developed and their responses to the forces that crossed their boundaries is as important as the story of the great societies themselves. For example, when the rate of international trade picked up, it presented questions for each major society to answer. How would the society participate in the trading system? What domestic impact did international trade have? Is this reminds me of the time when European countries were making contact with societies in Africa. They were at a great disadvantage. It was difficult to bring Africa into the world economy. They didn't have currencies. They used to use cowrie shells, and therefore the Europeans would get cowrie shells from some sea creatures, and give them, which I couldn't see the value in it. They had good items, valuable items to trade: cloth, oil, soap, gold, good things. But they couldn't read, up to that point, they couldn't read or write. They were not literate. They couldn't keep written records. They didn't put value on certain things that the European valued. Gold, but they didn't have a financial system. Things like that. How did one society's reaction to the new levels of trade compare with those of other major societies? Often, contacts were mediated by nomadic groups whose freedom of movement and sometimes warlike qualities gave them special roles in moving between civilization boundaries. Explicit international relations ultimately developed among civilizations themselves. Early examples included emissaries that regularly attended on seats of power, like those from Japan, Korea, and Vietnam that visited the Chinese emperor in the 7th century, but also trade operations with organized outlets in far-flung ports. Changes in patterns of contact organize much of the chronology of world history. Historians treat time not in terms of one event after another, but defining periods in which basic patterns emerge. Some time periods see a particular trend toward the formation of empires. Others involve the spread of major religions. Others stress the impact of new technologies or production systems. Not all societies in a given time period neatly responded to the larger world forces. Isolation from the wider world remained possible until just a few centuries ago. This book emphasizes six major time periods in world history. In the first, covered in part 1, civilization emerged. Early civilizations arose after people had found a wide variety of local societies over most of the inhabitable globe. The basic framework for managing and understanding world history resembles a weaving loom in which two sets of threads interweave. World history. A weaving loom. Two sets of threads interweave. One set consists of the major civilizations and key nomadic societies, identified through their principal characteristics and traced over time. The second set involves parallel processes and contacts that delineate the principal time periods of world history. The interaction between civilizations and international forces forms a warp and weave of world history. So, the interaction between civilizations and international forces forms a warp and weave of world history from civilization's origin to the present day. The warp and weave of world history. Do your reflection and email me.